Concord, the disaster so large that it could coin its own verb, is very likely 99% coming back. And I'm not speculating on that based on the recent articles about how it's being updated more than once a day in the back end on Steam. I'm not basing it off some rumors. I'm basing it off the logic that after you spent $400 million, if you have a video game, a perfectly functional video game, a bad one with very few redeeming qualities, but if you have it sitting on a computer in the office, you want to make some of that money back. And that opens up some very interesting conversations, like how absolutely out of touch is Sony? How bad can they screw this up? In what ways could Concord come back? And is there even a chance for it to come back and not be successful, but, you know, survive like many other games have been doing recently, which I also want to talk about in this video. So hi, I'm Mug. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. If at any point during the video you find it entertaining, you find it informative, remember to hit the like button. It helps the video reach further, helps the channel grow, and I appreciate it greatly. Let's get into it. There's been a lot of rumors swirling about Concord since it shut down back on the 6th of September. A lot has been said about its extraordinary budget, that even if its 400 million reported budget isn't true, even if it were half of that, it's ridiculous still. A lot has been said about the bubbles of toxic positivity forming inside development studios at Sony, which had an impact on how this game came out, no doubt in my mind. But not that much has been said about the last statement that they issued, which was that they were going to explore how to bring Concord back, how to better bring it to its players. And that's because even as it was shutting down, it's obvious that the priority was always there. We need to make some money from this disaster. Now, one of the reasons why people say that Concord won't come back is due to the sunk cost fallacy. That actually, after no matter how much money they pumped into it, just pumping more into it will just have them lose that money as well. Which, I mean, yes, they will probably lose that money as well, but I think it's presented without looking at the business sense of it, because it does make a lot of business sense. If you've already put in so much money into this game, you have a whole host of different options of how to try and salvage it. And they range all the way from a minimum investment to just turn it into a free-to-play game, slap on a microtransaction store, and get servers back up and running, which would probably be less than 5% of what they've spent on the game so far, all the way to actually listening to feedback and trying to make the game good and giving it a fighting chance out there. And then into the realm of what would be the sunk cost fallacy, but to the extreme, which would be things like reworking the entire game into a PvE co-op game, or adding a campaign to it or something like that, which would be a disaster. A hilarious disaster, but a disaster nonetheless. Now, what I can't technically guarantee, but I can say with confidence in every bone in my body, is that there is a team at Sony right now scratching their heads day in, day out, trying to figure out what they can do with Concord to bring it back. Be that in one of those options I said, or in another case, in what I would say is the more logical one, the one I would go for, is to take all of this tech, all of these assets, all of the things that you can take from the project, and then just put that into something new. It's a marketing disaster, nobody wants to get close to the IP, and let's just try something new. Which, if that happened, I know not a lot of people actually played Concord, but we would know. We would recognize the Concord into something else pretty quickly. If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's probably Concord. Now, it doesn't matter which of these options they end up choosing, because they still have to get over some pretty big hurdles. So let's play a game. Let's try to imagine what Concord would need to come back and exist. I'm not even talking about it being good. I'm talking about it existing. I'm talking about it not crashing and burning a second time, which is what I'm prepared for. I got ideas for the videos already, but let's talk about it. And at the root of everything, the number one problem that the game had was it didn't have a player base. Sure, all of the mediocrity of Concord is what led to it not having a player base. And I've talked about the reasons why Concord wasn't appealing to people like so many times that I'm tired at this point, so we're not going to do that. Let's focus on that player base issue at its heart. And to really give a good example of it, I want to use The Finals, a multiplayer first-person shooter that's kind of a spiritual successor to some of the older Battlefield games and more along the lines of Bad Company, and a game that I enjoy quite a lot. Plenty of people have said that The Finals is dying or is dead because of its loss of player base, but the truth is that it's a great example of how a game can be perfectly sustainable without the need to be the biggest in the space. And look, a lot of people stat track. I do that as well. It's important for me to keep up with those sorts of things, but a lot of people tend to exaggerate it a lot. The Finals launched to a 250,000 concurrent player peak, and then it slowly, steadily declined in the way that most video games do, towards around 20,000 peak concurrent players per day, which means that there's a lot more than 20,000 people playing it every day, but that's where concurrent players max out. When new seasons drop, you'll see that climb to above 30k, and at the tail end of a season where the content drought starts to set in, you'll see it drop to 13 or 14k. And those are perfectly healthy numbers to keep the game going, to make money, to have the developers continue with their job of improving the game and keep content coming, and hopefully within that stability, improve the game and find a bigger audience over time. The most important part about those numbers, though, is that it's playable. You can play the game. It guarantees a certain quality of the matches. And that's before we even start talking about the fact that the game is available on consoles, where it has probably around the same amount of users, if not a bit more. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, because when you launch a game, you expect your highest concurrent peak, at least for a very long time, to be on that launch day. And you expect it to go down after that. And having a player base where your game is functional is a tier. It's a very binary thing. You either have it or you don't. When Concord was available completely for free during its public beta a month ahead of launch, on Steam, it managed to get around 2,400 players. And over the course of that beta, it dropped dramatically. And of course, by the time we got to launch, its peak was 600 players. But this is the thing, even if it relaunched again with 2,400, you would expect that to drop down after a week if we're being very optimistic, towards half, so 1,200 players, and that is not enough people playing an exclusively multiplayer game to guarantee that it works. During that launch of Concord, I was one of the few of us I think, that were really paying attention to the game. And I was definitely one of the first people to call it out as being unplayable, as Sony needing to shut this game down or risking it being called a scam. They were risking potential legal action at that point. Because if you had a peak concurrent player base of around 300 players after 2 days since launch, you're talking about a game that a person could go and purchase, start to play, and not be able to. There's a chance that you couldn't find a match. Certain game modes, like the rival game mode, the one that's kind of like Counter-Strike, the flagship mode for Concord, you couldn't play it realistically. Some people reported queue times of 40 and 50 minutes. Some people reported never being able to do so. And when your player base is that low, you're either talking about incredibly long matchmaking queues where you potentially never get into a match, or in order to get you into a match, the game's sacrificing match quality. Forget about skill-based matchmaking, forget about which server you're connecting to, forget about ping. The game will just throw you and have you playing against people all over the planet, because it turns out that at that moment in time, there's only 400 people playing, which means there can only be a maximum of 40 matches. So Concord already tested itself as a free-to-play game and failed. It didn't clear the bar of the amount of people that you need playing a multiplayer game for it to be considered functional. So in this game we're playing, we have to imagine that Concord relaunches and captures enough of a player base to at least continue existing, which would be around 5,000 to 6,000 on the low end, I think would be good. You know, you double that with PlayStation, you remove the crossplay choice, you force it so that, hey, 10,000 peak concurrent players would translate pretty well to at least being able to find matches at any point in the day. You don't need it to be a huge success, but you do need at least that. Okay, so then the next question is, could they reach that audience? And I know for a fact some people would tell me, hey, well, now Concord is definitely more well known than it was when it launched. After everything that went down with it, a lot of people recognize the name and are probably curious about it. They have a morbid curiosity. Let's go play that game that was this incredible failure. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you hypothetically had a ton of people play it on day one. In any case, that would just slam the servers. Not to mention how many people would actually be curious enough to download and play the game compared to just watching their favorite streamer or watching some YouTube video covering it. It's not about all press is good press at this point. It's that it is a video game. Even if a ton of people flock to it and decide to try it out, if the game hasn't changed, the game that was there when it shut down was not good enough to interest people, so we get that out of the way because everybody's curious, but it wasn't good enough to retain people. People didn't keep playing the game because it's just not interesting. It's just not a fun game. It had too many game modes, none of them with an identity, uninspired characters, maps, most of the abilities and the character archetypes are not. I'm falling into the rabbit hole of Concord critique again. It's like automatic at this point. I really can't stress enough that it's a historical event, okay? And the fact is that unless they significantly retool Concord, unless they invest enough into it, unless they hit the nail on the head with some 300 IQ play, so that people who are curious come and play it and suddenly find themselves liking it and become part of the player base, and because it's a hot topic, maybe word of mouth spreads positively, and suddenly people come and start playing Concord, it's not gonna work. And I know that this conclusion I just presented sounds like, well, that actually doesn't sound that far-fetched. Remember what we're talking about here. How are they gonna fix this game? Do you really believe that they're gonna make something incredible out of this? They have an incredibly mediocre game, and they're going to extract a great game from it. They're going to release it, get that massive burst of players, which is already a big hypothetical, and then be good enough to retain them? Really? And that's why I'm preparing, at this point, for a huge flop. I'm preparing for Concord to fail again. The second flight of the Concord. But that's not exactly what this video is about. It's about the fact that Sony is 100% trying to bring it back. I don't know what they're doing. I like to believe that they're trying to come up with Concord 2 and they're going to promise PvE for it, and then they're going to cancel the PvE and just re-release Concord 1, but call it Concord 2. But the other part of this is that it's becoming more and more common. There's examples, there's blueprints on the flip side of Concord. We have games like Wayfinder, where Airship Syndicate encountered a ton of server issues, a ton of connection problems trying to launch their free-to-play pseudo-MMO Destiny-like, and when that failed terribly, they decided to rework what they had to make the most out of it, even after getting dropped by their publisher, and turned it into a pay-to-play, more single-player oriented and co-op oriented complete game that you can just go and enjoy. And while a lot of the reviews that are on the Steam page right now are still from back when, a lot of the people who have played the game after its rework have found it to be pretty damn good and have enjoyed it. New World Eternum is just the team trying to salvage the situation around New World. They crafted an MMO with a lot of ambitious designs that required a large player base to maintain, and the game kind of loses its value as people naturally stop playing it. So their whole rebrand is also just an update that makes the game more accessible for single-player folks to pay for the game and still have an option where they have an enjoyable single-player trek through the content, or alternatively a co-op experience through that content. And a lot of the MMO features are there. Some of them are cut back so that it's not 100% required or the focus of the game, to cut it safe in a way that if the player base of New World were to drop far below, and have it make money while offering a pretty good experience, taking advantage of the things that they made. What I'm surprised is that more developers aren't looking ahead towards these features from the get-go and designing their games more with the idea that they could fail, with the idea that you can come up with these pie-in-the-sky ideas, and especially in very high-profile cases like Concord, just fall flat on your face. you would think that they would better calculate the risk around something like Concord, or in the case of smaller games from smaller studios and publishers, they would consider the possibility of their failure and implement some of those features in their design from the get-go, instead of seeing these games fail and then have to retool their work as to not just lose everything that they did and all of the money that was invested into it. But for now, they're not doing that. They should though. They really should. They're just crafting the blueprint of make big game, it has success or failure to some degree, and now we need to do something else with it. And Concord is just another in that line. Because there is no chance, zero chance, that Sony doesn't try to do something with this. They cannot let it sit idle on a computer after all they've invested into it. Partially, I want that to succeed. I would like to see them pull it off. I would be excited at a 300 IQ play that leads to a fantastic game. But I also really want to see Sony punished for a lot of what they've done, for their insistence and overinvestment into live service games way behind the trend, to see them punished for a lot of the anti-consumer practices that they try to pull that I don't enjoy, and to see them punished for having become the remake console that people really are unhappy with. No longer are we getting those AAA single-player adventure games that a lot of us associate with Sony, and instead we're getting Concords. And I think that unless they truly fail, they're not going to change their ways. The one thing I can tell you for sure is that Concord will come back in one way or another. It might be under the same name, it might be under a new name, it might be even under a new franchise, but the ideas and the tech and the work that was put into Concord, they will try something before just letting that die. And no matter the result of it, I really am expecting it to just be as bad as the first time around, to just, you know, even more comical given that it's the second time around. Sometimes jokes are just funnier if you tell them twice. And if that's not the case, I guess I'll make a video saying I was wrong. But I hope this video was overall entertaining, informative, gave some perspective on it, and has prepared you for the return of Concord. It is coming. Remember to hit the like button, and if you want more from me, be that news, reviews, retrospectives, and my essays, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's have some fun in the comments below. Tell me, what do you think Sony would have to do for Concord's return to be successful? Man, what a disaster. But thank you so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my patrons up on the $1 patron wall. It's called that way because there's only one tier, $1, but they all support what I do here on YouTube, and I am eternally grateful. I've been Mug, and as always, I'll see you again very soon.